In this episode of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the crazy net minding situation in the free agency deadline that starts tomorrow. We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check that out. My name is Dan Holney. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition, I am joined by the Caps Chirp podcast. I have Hockey Troll in here. I have Michael Marzzacco of Stars and Sticks. And then I have Corey Swartz here of Hershey Nation. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. All right. Yeah, so thanks for joining me. So these are some crazy times for the Washington Capitals as they parted with both of their netminders. So Hockey Troll, I'm going to start with you here first. What were your thoughts when you heard the Washington Capitals cut ties with both of their netminders?
Yeah, so I was very upset to see VTech move. I'm glad that we got some sort of pick for him. After the wash, it came out to, one pick we got for him. And we'll just go ahead and say it was like the 36th or whatever it was. To me, that doesn't help us today. It doesn't help us tomorrow. Maybe helps us a few years down the road. That's okay. We got something for him. But then to see Ilya, I would have loved to see Samsonov go. And I'm surprised that there were no suitors for him. I think that he may have quite a scar on his name right now in the NHL for being a little too streaky, as no one was really even, it sounded like, willing to give up anything for this guy. So pretty brutal for a overall 20th, 22nd something round pick for us. First rounder gone for nothing. So that kind of sucks as far as the business side goes, but definitely an interesting thing. I can only assume, hope, and really pray and hold on to my butt that the Capitals are loading up to drop big money on a starting goaltender at least.
All right, Michael, I'm going to ask you that. So we heard word yesterday that the Washington Capitals, in fact, cut ties with Ilya Samsonov. They did not give him a qualifying offer. I guess a crazy thing could happen and he could re-sign with the Washington Capitals at a cheaper rate, even though Brian McClellan kind of indicated that that's not the case. What direction do you think the Washington Capitals are going to go in tomorrow? Is there a netminder you think would be a good fit on this team?
For sure. And before I get to that, I will say I don't think they're going to move forward with Samsonov. I think Peter Laviolette said in an interview with NBC Sports Washington that they're kind of ready to move on. So with that being said, I think Darcy Kuemper is definitely the name to look out for. And now that the Caps have no goaltenders, they have the money to do it.
Yeah, and I think that all arrows are kind of pointing in that direction to Darcy Kuemper. There are some other big names out there. I've heard Allen. I've heard, Bobrovsky trade or a Gibson trade. Corey, what are your thoughts on the Capitals? What were your thoughts? I know you cover the Hershey Bears primarily, so you knew Vitek Vanacek and Ilya Samsonov very well. What were your thoughts when the Washington Capitals cut ties with them?
Yeah, it was definitely both of them were fixtures in Hershey. Vanacek more so than over the last few years. Was really expecting one of them to stay. I wasn't to go. I don't think anybody really was, to be honest with you. And nice as the earlier sentiment was echoed to get a higher pick in the draft. I know the Capitals pick, I think, pretty well. They had a pretty good draft in my mind. But, it's now to see them have to kind of scramble here to try to find something in free agency. It's pretty uncharted territory for the Capitals, especially to lose a, too highly regarded.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the writing was on the walls all season. The Washington Capitals, and I've talked about on this podcast, is the inconsistency with this duo. My detractors would say, well, this tandem got them to 100 points, so how bad could they ultimately be? Hockey Troll, I mean, ultimately, you couldn't have been too surprised that they moved on, or do you think that ultimately they should have given it one more year with the Vanecek-Samsonov duo?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, man. Like the writing was on the wall. It wasn't going to work. It wasn't sustainable. I really liked Vanecek. I'm going to be honest. I thought he was the more steady hand. Okay, yeah, you have rebound control issues, but that's on the defense to figure out. Of course, you want to see that happen, be in complete control for the NHL for sure. But you have to go back and think like, okay, Samsonov got team suspended last year with Laviolette. He's been an issue off the ice a little bit. It's just not been good. It's not been terrible. It's not been catastrophic, but it's not been good. And having the two inexperienced tandem is just so tough. And maybe they were dealt a bad hand, but I just don't think, it's kind of maybe like an Andre Burakovsky or like a Verana situation, just let them move on, get him out of there, figure it out. In hindsight, if I had known that Samsonov was going to be, not qualified, and I would have probably held a little bit stronger if I was McClellan onto VTech, maybe getting a little more for him. But at the same time, this is how the cookie crumbles. And again, I really do think, that the star, that Kuemper is the number one get, right? The Capitals typically don't like to spend more than $6 to $8 million on a goalie tandem. I think Kuemper is making five-ish, six-ish right now. So he's probably looking at the Stanley Cup tax we're going to make. So I'm guessing that we're going to have to drop quite a lot on Kuemper, especially if it's going to be short term. So if it's like a 2-year contract, I would not be surprised to see an $8 million figure come out, which is just ungodly for a goalie. Unfortunately, their most important position, they get paid the least and they're voodoo. So it's just really just a high risk. It's definitely not where I'd want to be. But the big thing that I want to say is really look at going into the playoffs last season, right? Against Florida. Do we really think that a goaltender would have gotten us to a cup? Definitely not. Maybe at best, if we had a top, number 1, number 2 goaltender, maybe stretching, playing off our butts, going to a conference final. But looking at the powerhouse teams that were out there, I'm not really sure that the goaltending, while it is now a glaring issue, compounded by these moves, I think that really it's kind of, before it's not the only thing the Caps have to address. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that ultimately Ilya Samsonov kept them in the series. And to your point, I don't think that, even if they would have had a different goalie in there, they would have got a different result. I mean, they may have, but I don't think that they would have ultimately moved on past Tampa, which would have been the next round. The thing that concerns me the most about the Kuemper deal is that the term and the amount that he's looking for. And I know that Kemper's a good goalie, and I know he's riding the wave of winning a Stanley Cup, but is he really that great of a netminder? He also had some great players on the Avalanche in front of him, kind of propping him up and supporting him. So I am in on Kuemper, but I'm not quite sure he's as advertised. I guess we will ultimately see next year. So, Michael, my question for you is, who is going to be that number 2 netminder on the Washington Capitals? Are they going to try to pick someone up, or are they going to try to go with, say, a Fucale, or are they going to try to go with a Shepherd? Or I know Phoenix Copley's deal's up, but, maybe a strange thing, they tried to get him on the cheap. Who is going to be the backup netminder or the number 2 netminder for the Washington Capitals?
I think if you're looking in-house, you have to go with Zach Fucale. He's the one that's kind of proved himself a little more. We didn't really get a chance to see Hunter Shepherd, We did see Phoenix Copley a couple of years ago, but Foucault, as we saw in his first 2 starts, complete stud. And as far as that might be easier than looking for like a cheap name on the market, because it'll be hard to find like a cheap backup goaltender on the market. We thought a few days ago the Caps made their decision between Samsonov and Vanecek, and Samsonov would be the backup. But instead, it seems to be like Foucault. That's the one I'd go with.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, if they ended up going outside of the organization, they might not get someone as good as that anyway. So to end this segment here, I'm going to hit you up on this, Corey. Like we were talking about, if you were going to pick one of the netminders, would you go with Foucault or would you go with Shepard or kind of a strange thing, Phoenix Copley, if they could re-sign him to a cheap deal?
Personally, I'll play devil's advocate here. I'd love to see Phoenix get a chance to take that backup position. Ultimately, I have a feeling the cheap Craig Anderson type of option as they did a couple of seasons ago. But, I think that Copley's, he had his best season yet, I think, in Hershey's. He's a guy that, quietly puts in the work, I think. And the same goes for Zach Foucault. I mean, I think guys and, get a solid 1-2 punch out of them. Definitely be a starter backup type of role than what the Capitals went with last year. But I think that's what they're looking for in a lot of this coming season. And, I think either of those guys could step up. I mean, they've been the best team the past couple of seasons since Foucault, got picked up. And, from a Hershey standpoint, we've been goaltender in since that time. So I love to see Copley get that shot just for so long. And, I'd love to see him get that opportunity. But, I think the either role, certainly, even Shepard, I think, has the potential. But I'd like to see him get some AHL seasoning and carry Hershey here this coming season, for sure.
All right, so after the break here, it's not just netminding that the Washington Capitals have to deal with. There's some positions that need to get filled. What are those positions? We'll talk about that after the break. BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, so welcome back to this edition of Locked On Capitals. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Cap. So in the first segment, we talked about that obviously the Washington Capitals need to go out there and get that big name marquee netminder. But there's more needs that need to get filled, and primarily it is going to be that center position that has been left vacant by Nick Backstrom. So, Hockey Troll, I am going to start with you on this one. Before the show, we were toying around with some kind of crazy ideas. We talked about Malkin, amongst some other players. Who would be a good fit in Nick Backstrom's absence?
Yeah. This is the worst. I think for any hockey club, this is like the worst position to be in. A number 2 center. Obviously there's tons of number 1 guys that may be a bit underpaid. You may be able to get like Pierre-Luc Dubois type player and put him in a first line role, but because he's somewhat unproven, you're not going to pay him, the farm right now, and then he can figure it out through a contract. But for the second line center, Pierre-Luc Dubois is at this point looking for some sort of, big payday is most centers who are on that like first line, second line bubble, kind of where they would fit in on a team like the Washington Capitals. They're swinging for the fences, trying to secure that bag. Though I wouldn't mind Nazem Kadri. I just the dude's gritty. He will make teams pay, even if we're losing games. They're going to pay with a pound of flesh. That's DC hockey, baby. I love it. So I'm thinking, somebody that's, but then again, Nazem's looking for. He wins one cup after being suspended for 3 years in a row out of the playoffs, and he's like, "Yeah, look at my value. I'm amazing." And I mean, did he have a great playoff? Absolutely. So you're going to be paying that cup tax on him hard, and he rightfully so is looking to secure the bag for himself. So for the first time in a long time, I'm just really coming up empty-handed at this point for, pick a center at this point. Of course, Nick Backstrom's a huge piece of the team. It sucks to see him have what could be potentially a career-ending injury, which, I'm literally in shock as to like, what does this team look like without Nicholas Backstrom? I just don't know if I even want it, especially if Ovi's out there still banging him home. It's just super sentimental for me. But, I would like to pay, maybe bring in somebody in. It'd be nice to get somebody under Nicky's, $9 million a year cap hit, right? So maybe like a $7 million guy, young would be great, 25-ish, give him a chance. But if we're gonna sell the farm for a goaltender, which it looks like we're about to do, we're gonna be handcuffed. We might have to look inside, and that could be literally insert ex Hershey player, move Lars Eller up if he stays. Strength down the middle has been our kryptonite. Once we got Lars Eller, we won a cup 2 years later. It was a glaring problem when Marcus Johansson was on the Washington Capitals. It's been pervasive. So obviously it's a pretty dire need, right up there. It's a 1A, 1B with the goaltending situation.
Yeah, and then there's that LTIR money that is out there too. So the Caps have a little bit of money in the piggy bank, so to speak. There are some crazy names that I've heard attached to this team. Pretty much insert any name. Johnny Gaudreau, if you guys have been following it, says that he wants out of Calgary or he wants to explore his options. Same goes for Evander Kane. And if you guys remember earlier in the season, Alex Ovechkin actually was actively pursuing Evander Kane before he signed with Edmonton. Wouldn't that be a crazy line with Evander Kane on the Washington Capitals? So, Michael, I'm going to ask you, I'm on your website and you do a ton of player profiles. Who do you see being a good fit for Backstrom on that top line or second line center?
Internally or externally?
I would say externally. Yeah, if they're going to make a big move.
Oh, yeah, externally.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking before the show about Evgeni Malkin. I don't see that happening, but I did see a report that he could potentially go to a Penguins rival. I wonder who that would be.
Yep.
And so if not Malkin, there's definitely another one. Why not go for a Johnny Gaudreau? But that would be a little tricky. I heard he was linked to the Islanders and the Devils. I think he's more likely to go to the Devils. But if Gaudreau wanted to play with Ovi, hell, why not go for it?
Yeah, I mean, if they got the money to do it, why not? Could you imagine Gaudreau on this team and then, like Darcy Kuemper and net? I think that the landscape, a lot of these teams is going to be a lot different. I mean, is all of a sudden, are the New Jersey Devils going to be contenders next season? It's kind of a crazy idea to think about. I'm going to ask you now, Corey, what are your thoughts? Like I say, you profile and you talk about a lot of Hershey Bears teams. Is there someone in Hershey? I know you're familiar with Connor McMichael. Is he ready for his big shot? Who do you think would be a good person to fill in the absence of Nick Backstrom?
Honestly, I think that, obviously Ryan McClellan's words not come true in terms of the Vanecek Samsonov situation, but today where he was talking about filling Backstrom's position internally. And I look at to, step in depth-wise is going to be Alexei Protas. Big-bodied, he's improving his game offensively each season. He's been down in Hershey so far. Obviously, it's part of 2021. And, a good chunk of last year he spent up with Washington as well. So therefore, he's improving. I do believe Connor McMichael is going to be ready to take the next step. He's a guy that I think, give him that opportunity, he's going to run with it. He did so many remarkable things in that first season where he was down with the Bears, and you only wish that they'd been able to compete for a Calder Cup. He was such a game breaker, which is fairly rare to have come through like he was. There's to me, I have no doubt that McMichael will throw here for sure, but I do think it's going to be Protas. I do know they have Hendrix LaPierre waiting in the wings, and as a guy to probably have a shot there as well. I'm not really sure where he's going to land. Hershey, I just frankly hope they spend some of their time in free agency looking for depth piece. I have both Protas and LaPierre up at different points there, so they have some depth and even give the Capitals further options. In addition to the Scarbosa, Mike Vecchione is another good option as well in terms of depth pieces there as well that the Capitals have time to time here. So I'd really like to see them build on that though, give themselves some more options. Leave that cap space open for when Backstrom, if and when, is able to return.
Yeah, Vecchione was kind of lighting it up for the Bears this past season in his brief stint with the Capitals. I thought he did a good job too here. All right, so after the break here, we're going to continue to talk about what do the Washington Capitals need to address on free agency tomorrow. We'll talk about that after the break. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders parts on their computer, choosing only the brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to Rock Auto at home and in your pockets. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more on the same parts from a chain auto parts store? An example, Fuel Odyssey pump, $353 from a chain store, $216 from Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business suiting do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto parts needs. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us section, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, welcome back to this edition of Locked On Capitals. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. In this episode, I'm joined by Hockey Troll of the Caps Chirp podcast. I'm joined by Michael Marzzacco of Stars and Sticks. And then I'm also joined by Corey Swartz of Hershey Bears Nation. So in this final segment here, it's the one other spot that needs to get filled. I mean, this is a 30-minute podcast, so I have to kind of keep this as condensed as much as possible. We have to find someone to fill the spot of Tom Wilson on right wing. I'm going to start with you here, Hockey Troll. Do you think they need to go outside of the organization, or do you think that they have someone internal that could fill that position?
As much as I love Tom Wilson, as you can see from my background here, St. Thomas is what we call him on the podcast because he's a patron saint of the Washington Capitals, has never done anything wrong, completely clean player. I don't know what you guys think, but that's our script and we're sticking to it. While Tom Wilson, I think, is much more than a physical presence, I do think that his position is and his role in the lineup has really been kind of in that archetype, like physical guy who can create room for the skill, for the what we would consider skilled players. Obviously he's a stud himself, but someone who can create room and make open other guys up and can retrieve pucks and things like that. So I think that that's probably not to blaspheme our saint here, but to say that he can be replaced by probably somebody from Hershey with a big body. We talked about Leeson. We've talked about some guys that are big bodies with some finish, would be great. Get in there on the forecheck. You're on the top two lines. You know your role. You're here to create space, cause mayhem, get in front of the net, and retrieve pucks and make good passes. And then hopefully that sets up into something else. I think that's probably the easiest. And going back to our previous segments, a guy that I completely forgot about after I just looked him up during the break, but I think Andrew Kopp might be a good placement down the middle for us, and he's cheap. He's been really buried and in the shadow of all of the studs in Winnipeg. But I think that you can, like Scheifele and Ehlers and Wheeler. But if you looked at his contributions for the Rangers this last season on this kind of 1 year all-in deal, he was solid. A solid player that kind of, while he's physical, he's not like overly physical. He's a hound on the puck. He's a good on the forecheck, but he also has a lot of skills. So that might be a nice little stopgap. But that's really kind of what I'd consider that, a stopgap, maybe not a permanent option, but depending on how he develops. But back to the Tom Wilson thing, I'm thinking we call somebody up from the farm who has deserved the spot. And, you can replace a big body with maybe a guy who's just really ferocious on the forecheck. I feel like that's kind of an interchangeable type skill set there. If you're not going to go in and bang, you're going to go in and pester and cause turnovers based on stick play. So that could be a guy, even like Axel Johnson-Fialbi. I know he's not like a winger or whatever, but something like that. A young guy with some piss and vinegar, if you will.
Yeah. Or like maybe an Anthony Mantha would be a good stopgap or something like that. So I'm going to pivot here a bit, Michael, and I'm going to ask you about the defense of the Washington Capitals. There are some holes in the lineup, particularly on the left-hand side. As it was going to be Alexiev was supposed to be in there, but now he's going to be out 4 to 5 months. But Lucas Johansson may get his big shot. What do you think the Washington Capitals need to do as far as their defense? Do you think that they have to go outside of the organization? I think that there is some holes in that lineup that need to get filled by some players.
Not necessarily. The other day, I did like a 2022 starter projection for opening night, and I'll definitely do it again once we know like what's going on. It was a little hard to do in the beginning, but for the defense, it was the easiest because all I had to do was basically keep Farivar and Carlson up top and then move Trevor Van Riemsdyk to the second pair with Orlov. And so my third pair has Lucas Johansson and Nick Jensen. I thought that would be good because they re-signed Johansson. And I think TDR is getting a big role.
Yeah, and I think he stepped up big last year. So the question is there going to be a spot for Alexiev on this team when he comes back?
Probably, but it depends on how Lucas Johansson does. If he struggles, or if, God forbid, someone gets hurt, we had to deal with that all of last season, there might be a spot for him. But the Caps are going to look a lot different in 4 or 5 months, even more different than they'll look tomorrow.
Yeah, because what we've talked about is additions, but I guess what we haven't talked about is the subtractions. I know we subtracted Samsonov and Vanacek, but what other big players, may have played their last game with the Washington Capitals? Kind of a scary thought. I hope it's no one of great impact. So, Corey, just asking you about that. Is there someone that's in Hershey? I know we talked about Lucas Johansson. We talked about Alexiev. Are there other defenders that are in the pipeline that are ready to make their big break on the Washington Capitals?
Sure. And for me, that is on the doorstep is Bobby Nardella. The big baller defenseman, more of an offensive style defenseman, but he's been honing his game. So there'd be times where you'd pay for that offensive upside with, a bad break or miss that might cost you. But he's really done a good job of negating that from his game. Health is a little. There's stints last year where he was on the shelf for a long period of time. But to me, Evan Johansson made a couple steps behind possibly from being completely, as we saw with Johansson, it's one of those things where I think he could gain steam and, be a cause in here for sure as a guy that, I know Washington, Brian McClellan spoke wanting to have 8 defensemen up there. Now, will they necessarily have 8 to start with? So they did that a lot last season where, they had Matt Irwin, who was kind of the proverbial there at times. I suspect they'll probably go a similar route where it'll probably be Giv and Johansson or one or the other type of thing, possibly. Right there. And I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be contending for a spot and, maybe have a Joe Snively type. Starts off, where there's not a lot expected of him necessarily, and then he really jumps in, which I certainly think he has the capability to do so, for sure.
Yeah, Snively played really great for the Capitals when he was on the big team here. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Hockey Troll, why don't you tell everyone where we can find your podcast?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man. It's always a pleasure. You can find me at Hockey Trollin with an IN on Twitter, and you can find the podcast on Twitter at Caps Chirp. Right now we're on hiatus though, so obviously the season's over. We're just chilling for a little bit, regrouping, and I'm actually trying to find a new co-host, so we'll be doing that. But yeah, come October we'll be hopefully in full swing. So thanks a lot again for having us on.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Michael, I know you work for Stars and Sticks. Why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work?
Yeah, you can find my work. I tweet a lot about DC sports at my personal account, Marzzacco, and you can follow the website Stars and Sticks at stars_and_sticks. And yeah, we're still plugging away and grinding away. The off season, our work just heats up, and it's going to be a crazy day tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have some great reviews on what the Capitals did. Corey, why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work, where you cover the Hershey Bears primarily?
HBH Nation blog on Twitter, as well as at FPH Bears, which is at CSWA11. It's mostly the same thing for the Bears, but lots on players, reviews, signings, and all kinds of stuff there too. We were hoping the Capitals do for the Bears on free agency here with signing some guys for the Bears can push for their 12th Calder Cup here. So real excited to see what happens from a Hershey.
Yeah, for sure. You got to keep that pipeline stocked with forwards and defense. And I think the Hershey Bears normally do a great job in doing that. All right. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. All right, so gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm really glad that you joined me, and I'll talk to you guys again next time. Thank you for listening.